Your alarm didn't go off this morning because there was no alarm. There was light, specifically the slow increase in ambient brightness that precedes sunrise by about 40 minutes, the kind that modern humans sleep through because of blackout curtains and the fact that they stayed up until midnight watching something streaming. Ancient humans didn't have that problem. Their sleeping environment was, at most, a shallow rock shelter with a fire dying to embers, and the morning light came in from every direction simultaneously. You are awake before you decide to be awake. Your body did it. This is not romantic. You are cold because the fire needs attention, and something nearby made a sound about an hour ago that pulled you from deep sleep into a lighter, more vigilant state that you never fully recovered from. The person sleeping next to you is already stirring. The group's oldest member, a woman of perhaps 45, which in this context makes her the most experienced and knowledgeable person in the camp, is already sitting up, looking at the embers, making assessments. Nobody checks their phone. Nobody opens an app to see what happened while they slept. Nobody has a morning routine involving a podcast and artisanal coffee. The morning routine of an ancient human is considerably more direct. Assess threats, address immediate physical needs, orient toward the day's primary challenge, which is food. This is your morning. This is the morning of a Homo sapiens hunter-gatherer living approximately 30,000 years ago somewhere in what is now Europe, though the specifics of geography matter less than the fundamentals of the lifestyle, which were similar enough across time and place that the broad outlines of a day hold across vast stretches of the human story. Here is what that day actually looked like. All of it. The first hour of an ancient human's day was dominated by something modern people almost never do in the first hour of their day: serious, attentive environmental assessment. Before anyone moved far from camp, before the first foraging or hunting movement of the day, there was a period of listening, watching, and interpreting the landscape's information. This was not idle observation. It was survival critical intelligence gathering that the entire group conducted collectively, combining multiple individuals' sensory input into a composite picture of what the immediate environment contained and what risks it presented. Bird calls were among the most important information sources. Different species produced different alarm calls in response to different predators, a system of acoustic environmental monitoring that predates human existence by millions of years, and that hunter-gatherer peoples worldwide have documented expertise in reading. A particular call pattern from a specific bird species might indicate a predator moving through the forest at a specific distance in a specific direction. Another call pattern from the same species might indicate nothing threatening. Reading these distinctions accurately required knowledge accumulated across a lifetime of attentive listening in a specific landscape. Wind direction was assessed early and continuously. Large predators hunt partly by scent, and understanding where your scent was traveling, and therefore what downwind predators might be detecting your camp's presence, was operationally important for both safety and hunting success. Hunters whose scent reached prey animals before the hunters reached them were hunting unsuccessfully. The condition of the fire was addressed immediately. Fire maintenance in the ancestral environment was not a matter of convenience. It was a matter of survival, providing warmth against overnight cold, protection from predators who were deterred by firelight, and the cooking capability that enabled caloric extraction from a wide range of foods. The person who woke earliest in the camp typically tended the fire first, adding fuel, coaxing the embers back to productive flame. This was not assigned as a duty, it was simply the task most immediately necessary, performed by whoever became conscious first. The social dynamics of the morning hours in a hunter-gatherer band are better documented than most people realize, because researchers who have lived with contemporary hunter-gatherer peoples have provided detailed accounts of morning camp behavior that serve as our best window into what ancestral mornings looked like. The morning was a period of collective orientation, the group collectively processing the information gathered from overnight events, discussing what had been heard, seen, or sensed, and beginning the planning process for the day's activities. This planning discussion was not formal in the sense of a meeting with an agenda. It was more like what happens when people who know each other well talk about what to do, organic, influenced by the most knowledgeable voices, responsive to the information available. The question of where to forage and hunt was not answered by habit or routine in the way that modern people's days follow established schedules. It was answered fresh each day, drawing on accumulated knowledge of the landscape, where certain plant foods were in their current seasonal stage, where animal signs had been detected on recent movements through the area, what the weather suggested about where prey animals would be moving, whether the group was approaching the point where the current camp territory was sufficiently depleted that moving camp made sense. This daily planning involved real cognitive work. The knowledge base being drawn on, the mental map of a landscape covering potentially hundreds of square kilometers, the accumulated observations of seasonal plant phenology, animal movement patterns, water source reliability across seasons, the locations of flint outcrops and other raw material sources, was extensive and detailed. Carrying and applying this knowledge was a significant cognitive demand that occupied substantial mental bandwidth, particularly for the most experienced members of the group whose knowledge base was deepest. Children were awake and in the middle of all of this. There was no separate children's schedule, no school, no structured child-directed activity happening simultaneously with adult activity. Children moved through the adult social world continuously, absorbing information through proximity and participation in ways that constituted their primary education. A child listening to the morning discussion about where to forage was learning landscape ecology. A child watching the fire being tended was learning fire management. The educational model was total immersion in the actual activities of adult life. Food was the organizing principle of the ancient human day in a way that has no modern equivalent, because modern people have almost entirely severed the connection between the daily expenditure of effort and the acquisition of food. You go to work. You receive money. Money purchases food. The steps between effort and food are so numerous and abstract that the connection is effectively invisible in daily experience. An ancient human experienced no such abstraction. The connection between the day's physical effort and what was available to eat was direct, immediate, and fully visible. The day's effort was food acquisition. The food was the direct product of the day's effort. This had profound effects on the structure and texture of daily experience that are difficult to fully appreciate from the inside of modern food abundance. Every day began with genuine nutritional uncertainty. Not the mild uncertainty of not knowing what to have for lunch, but the substantial uncertainty of not knowing whether today's foraging and hunting would produce adequate calories to meet the group's needs. Some days produced abundance. Some days produced near nothing. The variability was real and the stakes were real. The foraging members of the group, typically women with children, older adults, and adolescents learning the skill, departed camp early, moving through the landscape with a combination of attentiveness and accumulated knowledge that effective foraging requires. Foraging is not wandering around looking for food. It is the application of detailed ecological knowledge to predict where specific food resources are in their current phenological state, assess the efficiency of collecting from each location against the caloric cost of reaching it, and navigate the landscape in ways that maximize the caloric return on the time and energy invested. An experienced forager carries a mental map of their landscape that tracks which plant species grow, where, when each species reaches the stage of ripeness or development optimal for collection, which locations have already been depleted by the group's recent visits, and which alternative locations might compensate for depleted. Preferred sources. This mental map is not static. It is updated continuously with each movement through the landscape, incorporating new observations into a dynamic model of resource distribution that improves in accuracy with each season of accumulated experience. The foraging group moved through the landscape with conversation, exchanging observations, pointing out finds, occasionally laughing at something. The popular image of ancient humans as grimly focused survival machines is contradicted by everything the anthropological literature tells us about hunter-gatherer foraging behavior. People talked. They commented on what they found. They sometimes argued about whether to collect something or move on. They told stories. The work was serious, and the stakes were real, but it was conducted in the social context of people who knew each other well doing familiar work together. The hunting side of the day's food acquisition was simultaneously more dramatic and more characterized by failure than popular depictions suggest. Hunting large game is difficult. The success rate of individual hunting attempts across documented hunter-gatherer cultures varies but is generally low, often well below 50% even for skilled, experienced hunters in familiar territory. A hunting party might track a promising animal for hours and lose it. They might approach close enough to attempt a kill and have the animal detect them and flee before a weapon could be deployed effectively. They might wound an animal and be unable to recover it before it escaped or was lost to darkness or terrain. This failure rate was normal and expected. It did not constitute incompetence or bad luck in any exceptional sense. It was the inherent difficulty of hunting large, fast prey animals with the weapons available in the Paleolithic: spears, atlat-propelled darts, in some periods bows, in landscapes where those prey animals were perfectly well adapted to detecting and evading predators. The hunters knew this. The group knew this. Planning and expectations were calibrated accordingly. The hunting party moved through the landscape with a quality of attention that has almost no modern equivalent outside of certain professional contexts. Every change in vegetation, every track, every displacement of soil or broken branch or hair caught on bark was potentially informative about prey presence, direction, timing. The reading of these signs, tracking, is a sophisticated cognitive and perceptual skill that researchers who have studied expert trackers describe as involving a kind of environmental literacy, as demanding as reading text, drawing on a knowledge base as extensive as any professional field. Conversation in the hunting party was minimal. The sounds of human speech carried distance, alerting prey animals to the hunting party's presence and direction. Communication during the approach to prey was conducted through gesture, through eye contact, through the kind of wordless coordination that develops between people who have moved through terrain together for years and can read each other's attention and intention from subtle cues. A successful kill was the culmination of hours of tracking, careful approach, and effective weapon deployment, and it was followed by butchering work that was itself skilled and effortful. A large animal needed to be processed quickly to prevent spoilage and to move the meat before competing scavengers detected the kill site. The hunters worked efficiently, drawing on butchering knowledge accumulated through many previous kills: specific cuts, specific processing approaches for different parts of the carcass, the division of the animal into portions that could be carried back to camp. This was practiced work executed with the competence of people who had done it many times. By the way, if you want to go even deeper into the secret lives of ancient humans, I just launched a full course called The Secret Lives of Ancient Humans. 10 modules, 3+ hours of content, covering everything we never talk about on YouTube. What they feared, how they communicated, what hunted them, and much more. Plus an exclusive PDF guide included. Link in the description. See you inside. The midday hours for a hunter-gatherer band in a warm climate often involved a period of reduced activity that modern productivity culture would struggle to categorize, but that physiological and anthropological evidence suggests was characteristic of ancestral human daily rhythms. The evidence for ancestral sleep patterns, drawing on studies of contemporary populations without electric light and on historical accounts of pre-industrial sleep, suggests that ancient humans may have slept in two phases rather than the single consolidated block that modern life demands. A period of rest or light sleep in the middle of the day, and, yes, nighttime sleep that itself may have been divided into two periods with a period of quiet waking activity in the middle of the night. The midday rest was not laziness. It was thermoregulatory common sense in warm climates where the hottest hours of the day were poorly suited for the sustained physical activity of foraging and hunting, combined with the physiological reality that the human body has a natural dip in alertness and function in the early afternoon that sleep science has documented extensively. Hunter-gatherer groups in warm environments typically reduced activity during peak heat hours, resting in shade, engaging in social interaction, and resuming active food acquisition in the cooler, late afternoon. During rest periods, the camp became the primary social environment. Children who had accompanied foraging parties returned with the adults. Elders who had not participated in the day's active work provided the social anchor of the camp, engaged in tool production or repair, food processing, or the transmission of knowledge through conversation and storytelling. The social texture of the midday camp was relaxed compared to the focused intensity of foraging and hunting, more opportunity for play, for extended conversation, for the kind of unhurried social interaction that maintained the relationships the group depended on. Tool production and maintenance occupied a significant portion of the ancient human day that tends to be underrepresented in popular accounts focused on the dramatic activities of hunting and foraging. Flint knapping, the production of stone tools through controlled fracture, is technically demanding work that requires understanding of conchoidal fracture mechanics, precise control of strike force and angle, and the ability to visualize the intended tool form within the unworked nodule, and plan the sequence of strikes that will produce it. Learning to produce high-quality flint tools to an expert standard takes years. Maintaining the skills takes regular practice. And the tools required constant replacement because stone tools, however sharp and effective, break, dull, and are lost during use. A hunter who used a dart tipped with a carefully prepared stone point needed to produce new points regularly. A butcher who processed large animals with stone knives needed to maintain a supply of sharp working edges. The camp at any given time probably had one or more people engaged in knapping work. The distinctive sound of stone on stone, the scatter of flakes accumulating around the knapper's working position, the focused attention of skilled handwork that can be performed in conversation and social context simultaneously. Hide processing was another ongoing activity that required substantial time investment and was critical to the group's material well-being. Animal hides were the primary clothing material in most Paleolithic environments, and converting a fresh hide into usable leather required a multi-stage process involving scraping, softening, and treatment with animal brains or other tanning agents. The work was physically demanding and time-consuming, often performed by multiple people working together. Social work in the fullest sense combined practical activity with conversation, story, and the maintenance of social bonds. The concept of leisure as a distinct category of time, time not dedicated to productive work, was essentially absent from the ancient human day in the modern sense. But this does not mean that every moment was grimly purposeful. The distinction between work and leisure that modern industrial organization enforces was not a feature of hunter-gatherer life, where most activities combined productive function with social engagement in ways that make categorizing them as one or the other somewhat arbitrary. The afternoon hours often brought the most intense productive activity of the day, as the foraging parties made their final collection decisions and hunting parties either closed on prey or acknowledged that the day's pursuit had not produced a kill. The return to camp with the day's food was a social event as much as a logistical one. What had been acquired was visible to everyone. The distribution of food in hunter-gatherer societies is one of the most extensively studied aspects of the lifestyle, and the findings are remarkably consistent across diverse cultures. Food sharing is the norm, food hoarding is strongly socially sanctioned, and the person who acquired food does not necessarily receive more of it than anyone else in the group. This sharing norm is not pure altruism. It is a risk-pooling strategy of extraordinary effectiveness. On any given day, any individual hunter might return empty-handed. On any given day, the foraging return might be inadequate for individual needs. Sharing widely means that the variance in individual food access is smoothed across the group. Everyone eats consistently, even though any individual's daily acquisition is highly variable. The hunter who returns with a large kill today shares it with everyone. Not because he is an unusually generous person, but because the social norm of sharing is maintained by everyone's understanding that tomorrow he might return with nothing and will expect the same treatment. This pooling system produced something that modern nutritional science would recognize as caloric resilience. The group's aggregate food access was considerably more stable than any individual's could be because the sources of variability were partially independent across individuals. When one person had a bad day, others often had better ones. The aggregate smoothed what the individual could not. Evening in the ancient camp was dominated by fire and by what happened around it, and what happened around it was foundational to the transmission of everything that made hunter-gatherer societies function. Cooking was the first priority of the evening hours, processing the day's acquisitions into edible, more calorie-accessible form. Roasting meat over fire, processing plant foods through cooking methods that broke down cell walls and reduced or eliminated toxic compounds that many wild plants contain in their raw state. The transformation of raw food into cooked food is not merely palatability improvement. It substantially increases the caloric yield extractable from food by making nutrients more bioavailable, reduces the energetic cost of digestion, and expands the range of foods that can be safely eaten. The campfire evening was the primary social and intellectual arena of ancient human life, and the evidence for this is both direct and indirect. Direct evidence comes from anthropological documentation of contemporary hunter-gatherer evening camp behavior, which is remarkably consistent across diverse cultures in its emphasis on narrative, music, and extended social engagement. Indirect evidence comes from the neurological and evolutionary analysis of human social cognition, which suggests that the evening campfire was the context in which the distinctively human capacities for extended narrative, complex social reasoning, and collective knowledge transmission evolved and expressed themselves. Storytelling was the dominant intellectual activity of the campfire evening. Not storytelling in the sense of entertainment, though it was that, but storytelling in the sense of the primary medium through which everything the group knew about the world was transmitted, tested, and updated. Stories encoded landscape knowledge, where resources were, what routes connected places, what hazards specific locations presented. Stories encoded social knowledge, the relationships between the group and neighboring groups, the histories of alliances and conflicts, the genealogies that established who was related to whom, and therefore with whom marriage was appropriate. Stories encoded ecological knowledge, the behavior of prey animals, the seasonal patterns of plant resources, the environmental indicators that predicted weather, migration timing, and resource abundance. The elder members of the group were the primary storytellers, and their value to the group was partly constituted by the stories they carried. A 45-year-old woman in a hunter-gatherer band had experienced more seasonal cycles, more environmental variation, more ecological events than anyone younger in the group. She had seen the unusually dry year that moved the herds to the eastern valleys. She had navigated the landscape in conditions of extreme cold that the younger members had never encountered. Her knowledge of what the landscape could do, what resources were available in extreme conditions, and how the group had successfully managed previous crises was stored in stories that the evening fire brought out. The night itself in ancient human camps was not the secure, unconscious period that modern people experience inside locked structures with. Environmental control. It was a period of reduced but real vigilance maintained collectively. Watches were kept, either formally or informally. People sleeping in lighter stages of sleep during portions of the night, attuned to sounds from the surrounding darkness that might indicate predator presence or other threats. The fire required maintenance through the night, which meant someone was always aware enough to add fuel when the flames dropped. The social structure of the group maintained a collective awareness that no individual maintained continuously, but that the group as a whole sustained across the night. The biphasic sleep pattern mentioned earlier, 2 sleep periods separated by a period of quiet waking, appears to have been a characteristic of ancestral human sleep rhythms in ways that modern consolidated sleep schedules represent a significant departure from. During the quiet middle-of-night waking period, people in historical accounts are described as engaging in quiet conversation, in personal prayer or reflection, in activities that the silence and darkness of the deepest night hours made appropriate. The quality of sleep in the ancestral environment was shaped by physical fatigue in ways that modern people rarely experience. A day of foraging covering 10 or 15 kilometers, of hunting requiring sustained physical exertion, of tool production and hide processing and camp maintenance. That day's physical demands produced a tiredness that modern sedentary life does not. Sleep was deep when it came because the body had earned it. Here's what the full account of a normal ancient human day ultimately reveals, and it is something that does not come through in the individual details, but only emerges when you hold the whole picture at once. Ancient human daily life was extraordinarily rich in a particular way that modern life, for all its objective advantages, often is not. Every sensory modality was engaged continuously. Every social relationship was active and present throughout the day. Every skill employed was directly connected to survival in ways that made competence immediately meaningful. The knowledge required to navigate the day successfully was vast, was applied constantly, and was tested against reality on a timescale that made feedback immediate. There was no commute to a job whose products you never used. There was no meeting about the meeting. There was no performance review or quarterly target or inbox requiring management. There was the landscape, the group, the fire, the food, the story, the sleep, and then the light again the next morning. This does not mean ancient life was better. The infant mortality was devastating. The absence of medicine meant injuries and illnesses that are trivially treatable today were death sentences. The cold could kill you. The drought could kill you. The wrong predator encounter could kill you. The life expectancy was short enough that the 45-year-old elder was exceptional and knew it, but normal. A normal day for an ancient human was a day of full engagement, cognitively, socially, physically, sensorially, with the actual world. Not a mediated, abstracted, screen-filtered version of the world, but the world itself, in its weather, and its sounds, and its smells, and its dangers, and its unexpected abundances. The light came. The fire was tended. The day was navigated with everything the person knew and everything the group knew combined. Then the fire burned lower. The stories ended. The camp went quiet except for whatever was moving in the darkness beyond the light. And somewhere in there, between the vigilance and the exhaustion, there was sleep. Real sleep. The kind the body needed because it had genuinely used itself up. Tomorrow the light would come again.